Hi, everybody. I'm here today with Dominic Lavelle, the founder and director at Go Green Experts. Hello, Dominic. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for finding time to speak to me. So, just a quick word of introduction. How did you get involved in this consultancy business, and how did you come about to found Go Green Experts?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for agreeing to interview me. I suppose Go Green Experts is born out of the fact I'm very interested in climate change. I mean, taking a step back, I grew up in London and then moved to the Midlands because my wife grew up here. So I now live in Worcester, and Worcester's a very green part of the country. So we started doing a lot of walking outdoors and walking up the Malvern Hills and cycling and things like this. And over time, I kind of realised I was reading things like New Scientist, which were saying, and some of the newspapers, which were saying that climate change is a big problem. And when I researched it, it became apparent that it was. And in some ways, it's a problem that's quite easy to solve in terms of the technology, easier than some people realise. A lot of the technology is already out there. But psychologically, it can be a difficult problem to solve the way it's set up. So, you know, the fact we all contribute a little bit, it's spread globally, it makes it difficult to mentally kind of get people motivated to solve that problem. So I became very interested in it from a kind of, I guess, academic point of view. I thought it was an interesting problem to solve. And then also from a kind of, it's a big problem that needs to be solved. So that's why I wanted to be involved. And therefore, I set up Go Green Experts using the commercial experience I've gained over the years to help clients lower their footprint.
And how big is the company? Who have you got in terms of your team?
Yes, there's 5 directors altogether. So there's myself, I'm the managing director, and then my wife is finance and operations, and then I've got Simon, who's on the strategy side of things. So he's looking a bit further ahead and helping us make sure we plan for the future. Then I've got Claire, who's an expert in carbon footprinting, who helps make sure that the technology we're using is right. And then I've got Anthony as well, who's the technology director, making sure that yes, the academically it's the right answer, and technology is all flowing through nicely. So we've got a nice smooth process. So that's the team.
Excellent. So it sounds like you've got all the bases covered there. So a basic question then: if I'm a small business owner, why carbon neutral? Why should I be thinking about it, worrying about it as a business owner?
Yeah. So I think there's the obvious answer that it's the right thing to do, and that's been true for a while. But I think more immediately now, and actually, you know, there's a lot of SMEs now contacting us, and it's because commercially it's the right decision for the business. It's a great thing for the business to be able to talk about, and historically that was true maybe from a cost perspective. So it's always gonna help lower some of your costs, like your energy usage, for example. Help companies lower their travel costs. But more recently, it also really helps with their sales and their brand. So if they're a B2C company, you've now got around 85% of consumers saying they want to give their money to ethical brands. And of those, about 65% of them are really keen to give to ethical brands. And therefore, being able to stand out and saying you're carbon neutral, or even if you're not carbon neutral, saying you know your footprint is and you have a plan to reduce it and here's your plan, is very compelling for consumers. So that's B2C. And then if you're a B2B company and you're either working with government or councils or large corporates, all of those entities are increasingly moving to a net zero targets and going carbon neutral over time. And they need their supply chain to reduce their footprint as well. So it really allows SMEs to get on the front foot and be proactive in their marketing and sales strategy.
Sounds fantastic and reasonable. I think I'm convinced. So in terms of the reasons, you spoke about the ethical reasons, right thing to do, this whole consideration with the global climate change, but then there is the fact that people should be acting locally within their own sort of remit area geographically, or the niche that the business occupies. In terms of the biggest challenges that small and medium-sized businesses must overcome to become carbon neutral, what would you list as those? I don't know, perhaps top 3 biggest challenges.
Yeah, if we take a little bit of a step back and just very quickly go through the process so people understand it.
Sure.
And then I'll give you the top 3 challenges. So there's basically 3 main steps. And the first step is to measure the carbon footprint. So without knowing what that is, it's very difficult to know the recommendations to put in place. Mm-hmm. And that I always advise, that's a key step that's sometimes missed. And it's actually fairly straightforward to measure the footprint. And then the second step is to analyze that footprint and help companies come up with a plan, say a 12-month plan as a minimum, to then lower that footprint. And again, working with SMEs, agreeing some tactical quick wins that can get the company going is really important. And that's what we can help with. And then the third step in the short term, once they've lowered their emissions as much as they can, mm-hmm. is to then offset the rest to go carbon neutral. While doing that, also keen to then agree a longer term plan so they can actually reduce their emissions to 0 in the future, or net 0, which is quite challenging to do for some SMEs, and that's why that might take 10 or 15 years. But they can go carbon neutral quite quickly using offsets, but we need to be aware that offsets aren't as good as reducing your own emissions. To answer your question in terms of then what's most difficult for organisations in that process, well, initially it's actually the data capture. So to have a good carbon footprint measurement, there needs to be good data around travel, what their processes are. If they're a manufacturing firm, what's their inputs, what's their process, what's their outputs. And we can always give a view and do a carbon footprint report, but that report will be better if we get better data in. And often our recommendations to clients in the first year is to help them set up better processes to capture better data. And that really helps with that. So that's one big issue, is capturing the data. But we can always start with a client. Doesn't matter what kind of data they've got. We can always make a start with them and make improvements over time. The second issue then is often around hearts and minds. So, if you think about your typical SME, they're very busy. They've got often a lot of the senior people often wearing a number of hats, doing a bit of marketing, a bit of sales, trying to run the business operation, and actually carving out some time to do the carbon footprint side of things can be challenging. So that's where we come in, where we actually take some of the load on that for them, keep things simple, and help them during the year to manage that plan that we've agreed with them at the start of the year. But nevertheless, finding the time for an SME to actually commit to this, it will take a bit of time, and that sometimes can be a challenge for an SME. And then the third thing is, once the quick wins are out of the way in the years 1, year 2, there normally needs to be more fundamental change. And the way the UK economy is structured, it's very difficult to get to net 0. So each year, as you lower your emissions, it gets harder the next year to reduce them more. And we seek emissions reductions of at least 7% each year, which gets you to net 0 by about 2050. And in years 3, 4, and 5, that begins to then get more challenging. And that's when you need a longer term strategy, because you've already done the quick wins.
That's fantastic. It sounds really sensible, and presumably larger businesses would be investing in having a role as such as an environmental responsibility or sustainability officer or person who's sort of looking after it, whereas smaller SMEs will be relying on your expertise. Is that the right kind of assessment?
That's correct, yeah. So in a way, some companies outsource, say, their marketing or their finances or their IT. They can now outsource their carbon management, which is a simple way of looking at what we do. And then more widely, you've got carbon footprinting and management. You've got wider environmental considerations like plastic. They can start outsourcing those responsibilities as well. So they're still accountable, but they give us the responsibility to manage it for them.
Fantastic. You did mention something which I I spotted earlier, procurement. From your experience in terms of bidding for public sector contracts and so on, how does it help, becoming carbon neutral? How does it help a business that's in this bidding war, highly competitive sort of area of trying to get big public sector contracts?
Yeah, so if you're contracting with the government now, they in their kind of template tender documents, they have a line around corporate social responsibility, and they often now have a line around sustainability as well, like an area that needs to be filled in. And some of the companies we work with don't actually have that much to fill in around sustainability, and then we come in, help them go carbon neutral, and suddenly they have a lot to say, and it can really tip the balance to them winning those contracts. I mean, you've got to consider the UK government itself has committed to being a zero carbon economy by 2050.
That's right.
That means about 80% reduction has to happen by 2035, which is only 15 years away. So a lot of these contracts are 5 years long. So they, the government is making decisions now around who they're partnering with, and there's a minimum you need to know your footprint and have a plan to lower it to win some of these big contracts. And that's true with government. It's also true with big companies like the supermarkets now. If you're selling to supermarkets, they're really hot on their supply chain. All of the big supermarkets now, in terms of ensuring that they're sustainable, have a low footprint, and that's being driven. It's driven by cost. It's being driven by their consumers that are buying in the supermarkets want to have these credentials as well.
Right. So you did mention a couple of sectors though there. So the food sector, but also transport. I think you has come across in one of your sort of descriptions earlier. What kind of sectors do you work with in terms of SMEs coming over to you and asking you to advise them?
Yes, we actually work with any sector because the process we've set up is repeatable. So we've set up, rather than trying to do everything ad hoc, we've set up a repeatable process that can be applied to any sector. And the steps I mentioned to you before, those 3 core steps, can be applied to any sector. But the 2 main differences are, if you're a service company, so you're not making anything, it's generally a bit more straightforward to measure your footprint and recommend to lower it. Whereas if you're a manufacturing company, you have inputs, and you often have quite a lot of suppliers inputting into a manufacturing process. Then you've got the process, then you've got the outputs. And understanding that process, understanding what physical materials are being put into the product, and then any wastage along the way, and then there's often quite a bit of energy used to create the product during that manufacturing process. That's often quite a bit more complicated, and therefore a bit more in depth than a service company. So that's quite a distinct sort of difference. And then I mean, in terms of the kind of companies we've done, for example, we did a financial services company recently. So again, fairly straightforward. We did an online payments company, which we might come on to in a bit, PLC, which is good. And then at the other end of the scale, we've just finished with a fridge recycling company and white goods recycling company, who, what they do is brilliant, because they take these faulty white goods, they fix them as much as possible, and then they sell them on at a good rate to customers. So that kind of moving towards a kind of economy where rather than throwing stuff away, we're trying to sort of reuse it a bit more, which is good to see.
Excellent. We had a meeting not long ago, last week, involving lots and lots of charities getting interested in what's happening around carbon, going carbon neutral in Worcester. Do you work with charities as well at all, or?
Yeah, so we can do. We have a partnership with the Worcestershire Environmental Group, WEG. So that's our sort of charity partner of choice. And it's interesting because we look more on environmental carbon footprinting side of things, and they look at the wider ecology things. So ensuring that the wildlife, for example, is looked after in Worcestershire. So a simple example, which is quite popular at the moment, is rather than councils cutting grass all the way down each summer, they let it grow to be more of a meadow. That really helps with wildlife like the bees and the insects, which then gives food to the birds. So it helps the whole ecosystem. And that's quite a simple change that they're really pushing through in Worcestershire and really driving. So that's a charity we're really keen to work with. And And then in terms of actually helping them go carbon neutral, that's something we're discussing as well. And obviously, because they're a charity and our partner of choice, then commercially that'll be a different arrangement to if they were a commercial entity.
No, absolutely. I think there's lots and lots of organizations out there set up as with charitable status that for all sorts of reasons, ethical, moral, and so on, would be interested to reduce their carbon footprint as well. So in terms of any recent case studies, you did mention a financial services company. Can you sort of give us an example of who you worked with recently?
Yeah, I thought I'd choose Bango PLC because I mean, like I say, we work with companies of all different shapes and sizes, from a very small two-man band all the way up to Bango's a PLC with hundreds of customers, and they're an online payments company. And their customers include Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, amongst many others, where they provide online payment services to those organizations. So indirectly, what Bango does in terms of that payment, if they can make that a greener service, that service is then being used by multinational organizations, and therefore that will have a ripple effect into the economy of making that sector of the economy a little bit greener. So Bango, really great team, really enthusiastic to work with us, and because they were slightly bigger, they did have a team that we could work closely with. And the first thing we did was measure their carbon footprint, because they've not had that before. And it became quite apparent that a big part of their footprint was the servers that they use. So they host a lot of these payment services and the software that they build, and they've got IP on the software. Their servers and electricity usage is a massive part of their carbon footprint. And so we are helping them to lower through IT, so their computers, how their staff use computers at home and at work, the electricity that uses the computers and their servers, to make that as green as possible. And so that takes a bit of time to do, but that's something they're really keen to work with us on. And then the other thing they're doing is they're actually moving office in the summer. So through moving office, that's a perfect time for them to choose an office, kit it out in furniture that's very low carbon, ensure the office itself is double glazed, triple glazed, ensure it's heated and cooled in a sustainable way. And so we're advising them during that office move to make sure they move into a building that is as close as possible to net zero. Sometimes with a company, you're lucky when they contact you, there's a point in time with that company, if they're moving office, for example, where it's a great time to actually advise them, because you can make a big change quite quickly.
That's fun. It sounds like a really inspiring story, especially when it comes to sort of starting anew with the new HQ, new offices, and trying to make a nice, clean, green start, I suppose. It's also fascinating that I suppose indirectly, because they process payments for the Microsofts and others of this world, you are basically joining the ecological crusade of Bill Gates and the others. So that's really he's really hot on this subject, of course, recently writing about it and giving lectures as well. Yeah. Carbon capture as a technology, it's still fairly new, but I believe that both in this country and also in our region, it's becoming more established. Have you got experience with this technology and companies trying to develop it and use it as well?
Yeah, so as part of going carbon neutral, because a company can't go completely zero carbon on day one, we help them lower their footprint as much as we can, and then offset the rest using carbon credits. And those carbon credits are fundamentally some kind of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere or stopping carbon to go into the atmosphere. So there's carbon credits, and then there's carbon capture. Some of it can be very expensive, and some of it's still in the trial phase. So what carbon credits often are, and what we often invest in, is tree planting and tree management schemes. So for example, if you invest in a forest to ensure that forest doesn't get cut down, there's always a question mark about, well, would that forest have been cut down or not? But the majority of the time, and you can only go with the evidence you've got, is by investing in this, you're stopping that forest being cut down. That will stop carbon going into the atmosphere, and that forest will pull out more carbon over time. So that is a way of offsetting your carbon. There is technology available. So there's carbon capture and storage. So this has been talked about for a long time, and there's a big debate around how commercially viable it is now. Well, it's still kind of in a test phase, and how commercially viable can it ever be? And I defer to the scientists and the technologists who have differing opinions on this, but I think my view is that that's going to be difficult to roll out at scale. So, for example, putting big coal plant, carbon capture and storage on it, there's fundamental thermodynamic issues around whether that's actually going to work well. But it might, that there are mixed opinions on it. And then another one is there is technology now that pulls carbon directly from the atmosphere. And again, that's in the test phase. And just to give you an example, if you wanted to offset your carbon using some of the forest management schemes that we use, some in the UK, some overseas, is somewhere between £8 and £15 per tonne. That's the price of it. By pulling carbon directly out of the atmosphere using this new technology, it's closer to £1,000 a tonne. So at the moment, it's not commercially viable, depending on what you believe the real price of carbon is. So, which again is up for debate. It could be very high, but that technology needs to get substantially cheaper. Now, what's interesting is that we do need that technology to work by 2050, because the plan is really from 2050 to 2100. We won't be able to reduce completely to net zero because it's very difficult to do that as a whole economy. And so we do need some kind of way of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's a bit of a problem with our current situation. Now, luckily, we do have a little bit of time to resolve it. But the more we can actually stop emitting now, the better, really, because that is a bit of a concern for scientists as we look out into the future.
The outlook for the future becomes better by sort of acting faster, I suppose. That's the
look. Like I said, the technology's there. I mean, we really should just be rolling out the technology now. We should be electrifying everything as much as possible. We should be making electrification 100% green as quickly as possible. That technology is there, and you can get 80% of the way there now with existing technology that can be rolled out scale. We can do that for the next 10 years. And then you've got the last 20%, which is harder, but will get easier over time as the technology improves. So, we really need to get going quickly on this rather than relying on potentially future technology that hasn't been invented yet, that may or may not pull carbon out of the atmosphere in the future. So, yeah.
It does make complete sense. Just to wrap things up, how do people get in touch with you? What would be the easiest way to go and contact Go Green Experts and your team?
Yeah, so we have a website, like I guess most companies. So you can www.gogreenexperts.co.uk, and then there's a contact form on there. There's a chat form, or we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. So you have lots of options. But yeah, a simple email from our website is a quick and easy way of doing it, I think.
Great stuff, Dominic. I'll make sure that this video will be published and circulated as far as and wide as possible. Great to have you with us. Thank you very much, and let's stay in touch. Take care.
Smashing. Thanks, Tom. Have a good evening.